Back in the pioneer days, everything that people ate came out of their home gardens. They were completely self-sufficient because they had no choice.
Now, things may be different today, but it's still a great deal of fun to see just how self-sufficient you can be from your home garden. I'm Elliot Coleman.
And I'm Barbara Damrosch. And if you'll stay with us for the next half hour, we'll explore self-sufficiency in the garden.
And we'll visit with Helen Nearing, who has been living a self-sufficient lifestyle for 50 years.
On Gardening Naturally.
Barbara and I have walked down the road to visit our neighbor Helen Nearing. Helen and her husband Scott are sort of the parents of the idea of simple living and self-sufficiency. They began back in the 30s in Vermont, and in 1950 wrote a book about that called Living the Good Life. At the same time, they moved here to the coast of Maine. Now, Scott died at the age of 100 in 1983, but Helen, at the age of 90, is still living here and still living that same simple, self-sufficient life. What we will see today is that the keys to that life are to keep it simple, use good materials, and grow a garden. Helen, you and Scott were involved in self-sufficiency longer than anyone I know. Can you tell me some of your reasons for your interest and the benefits?
Because we liked the country. We lived in New York City in the slums, and we'd rather be poor in the country than poor in the city where we had to eat out of the barrows. At least we could grow our own radishes and potatoes and lettuce, and so we did. I'd never experienced anything like that before.
And you find that's been totally satisfying to...
Well, here I am, happy and old in my 90s, and still carrying on the same way.
The first thing that people notice when they come here is the stone house. Can you tell me how that came about?
Oh, well, the house, of course, we built in our... I was in my 70s and Scott was in his 90s. There's not a cut stone in the building. I laid every stone myself, and Scott mixed the concrete in a wheelbarrow.
And these are stones you found around the property?
Found around on the beach or borrowed from people or so. But we took 3 summers at it. We didn't hurry. Stone building is slow, and we took our time at it and enjoyed it. It was our golf. It was our tennis.
Well, what I like is that it gives you a house that will never fall apart, because it's made of really solid material.
It's solid. Stone and big timbers, which we got from an old factory they were tearing down. So the whole thing is local made and made by local people.
And there's also another stone wall, this time around the garden. That's something one doesn't often see.
Most people wouldn't build a stone wall around the garden. They'd put up a wire, or they would put up nothing at all. But we enjoy building with stone, and why not? So after we'd finished the house, we put a wall all around the garden, which cats love. They parade on it, but no animals can get in. A deer could jump over a 5-foot wall, but he's not going to. If he were inside, they'd get out, but they're not going in. And it keeps the weeds and the slugs out because they're outside the garden.
That's a great system. I love it. What I'm doing here is growing a loaf of bread in the garden. This is spring wheat, and a small plot, even one this size, if I get a good yield, should give me about 5 pounds of flour. Now, if I'd wanted to grow winter wheat, I would have planted it last fall. It would have grown through the winter and been slightly taller than this. For spring wheat, I planted as early as I could this spring, and it'll have plenty of time to mature a nice crop for me. It was very simple to do. I just took my little garden seeder and filled it with wheat seeds instead of what other seeds I might have used if I were planting another crop. These look just like what you'd buy if you went and bought wheat at the store. I put the top on, and then I just walked down the row, feeling very much like a large-scale wheat farmer, but on a small garden scale, putting in neat rows like this. The advantage of wheat as a crop is that it gives the garden a rest from vegetables. This is a grass, and it has an enormous root system that does wonderful things for the soil. And in addition, you'll get a crop of straw here that's great for mulching. So give it a try. And next time you eat that lettuce and tomato sandwich, you'll have the pleasure of knowing that you grew the bread right alongside.
Helen, standing inside this garden has a nice protected feeling to it because of the wall.
That's the idea, to contain the plants, keep the wind out, keep the animals out. It even keeps the weeds and the slugs out. The slugs get tired climbing the wall, so we don't have slugs.
How many square feet is this garden?
This is 50 by 50. Quite a small garden in comparison to what we had here, 100 by 100, and in Vermont we had 2 or 3 gardens this size.
Do you think you needed a garden that big?
50 by 50? No, I didn't need it, but here it is, and I can give a lot away.
Oh, so this feeds not only you, but some friends.
This feeds visitors.
Yes. That's great. Well, everything seems to be doing fine this year. Your peas are fine, and I noticed that you're using the old-fashioned brush system for trellising them.
That's the only way we used to brush when Scott was around. He would cut them in the woods and bring them here, and I'm still using some of his old brush. Lasted 10 years.
That's pretty good. What kind of tree did they come from?
Whatever he was cutting.
Any old thing.
Whatever was.
But I see you're moving on to the Elliott system behind.
If he will contribute another one next year, I'll be really elegant.
And they seem to work fine both ways. Nice, healthy bed of onions there.
We use a lot of onions. I can use onions in soup. I can use them to give away. I have onions in the cellar right now, left over from last year, perfectly solid and without sprouting.
That's wonderful.
Yep.
And you've got lettuces and some rhubarb chard and
garlic,
carrots, and
a little of everything. It's a tiny garden, really, in relation to the one that we had before.
Mm-hmm. But you've got cabbages, you've got kale, you've got strawberries, you've got
asparagus.
A fine asparagus bed.
Yes.
And that's plenty for you to eat over there.
I have asparagus every day for 2 months if I want.
And over here, I noticed that you're doing your beans on poles. Are those ones you cut around here in the woods?
Yes, of course. We don't buy anything that we can make ourselves.
And the corn, is that squash growing among the corn?
Yes, that they say keeps the animals out. When they come in to get the corn, they don't like to walk on the squash, and the corn has a lot of room in between it, so there's room for squash.
Now, I've tried that with coons, because I know the coons don't like this. So the coons occasionally get in the garden?
Once only, and I reprimanded him severely, and none has ever come back.
And that did the trick.
Yeah. It's a 5-foot wall. They could get over it.
Yeah. Now, this bed over here is neat because you've mixed a lot of things up together. I'm seeing purple basil and marigolds, parsley, nasturtiums.
Yeah. It was an afterthought. What shall I use that bare space for?
Well, your tomatoes are certainly coming along.
They're thriving.
And you're growing them on the same sticks from the woods that you grow your beans on.
That's where all our material comes from, the woods.
And then when it gets to the top of this, it goes up these strings?
It goes up the strings, and then it comes over the whole roof and droops down there, and I pick them from the ceiling.
And how late in the year can you do that, Helen?
A month after they've frozen in the garden.
Well, that extra month makes a difference.
Still picking them here. Doesn't make a difference.
And it's just a simple, passive solar greenhouse, isn't it?
Just old storm windows and a stone wall that reflects the heat. Faces directly south, of course.
And the stone wall is just an extension of the garden, but it looks like it's about a foot taller.
It is. Why?
Just that much more heat retention, right?
That's right.
I mean, that stone will hold the heat, and that's one reason you get those late tomatoes.
And other things. Lettuce also grows in here. Parsley grows in here. Leeks grow in here.
Yeah, I see you've got these raised beds. And you know, the soil in here, just like in your garden, looks so dark and rich. Even where you haven't watered it, it looks dark.
It's better.
And is that all that good
I
compost?
pet these in here.
You pet them?
I pet the plants in here. The ones outside are just friends. These are pets.
Okay. Now, the compost that you make is your secret, isn't it?
Well, this greenhouse is full of compost.
Well, I want to
just
see
clay soil. May I show you the soil?
Okay.
When we came here, the soil was pure clay. You could make pots out of it. Gosh, Scott said, you're going to have a tough time here, kiddo, with this soil, but we built it up.
And look
purely
at it now.
compost.
Look at it now. That's the difference that compost makes.
That's it. Let me show you the compost pile. Hi, Helen.
Hi.
While we were walking down, I noticed a load of seaweed on the beach, so I went and got it for you.
Thank you.
Show me where I should put it.
I'll show you where to put it.
Oh, Helen, it's nice to see that what I learned from you and Scott is still happening. Layers of brown material, layers of seaweed.
Can we throw these weeds in first?
Well, you're the
put
boss.
Seaweed on?
Yeah. That looks good. You're in charge of that. I'm in charge of putting some seaweed on.
Simple as that.
Now, this has to sit for how long before it's ready to use?
I leave it a year. We don't bother to turn. We have so many compost piles that we don't have to turn them. We just wait till they mature.
Can we show everybody what it looks like when it's finished?
Yes.
Where would that be?
Up here. Here's a finished compost pile, more or less finished.
Oh, Helen, this is beautiful compost. Now, most people would be surprised you get it this nice without turning it.
You don't have to turn it if you have enough of them ahead. If you have 3 or 4 ahead, you just wait till they mature.
And I suspect it helps that air can come up between these poles here.
That's
Is that
the
part of
idea,
it?
and the air comes in through the side poles.
Isn't that nice? And everything's made from locally available material. I love it.
What else?
Now, we've shown a lot of the projects you've done here. Tell me what your next projects are.
Not to reach 100.
The root cellar is the perfect model of self-sufficiency as far as root crop storage goes. In the same way, when your root crops are in the garden, they take as much of the sun's rays as they need for photosynthesis. The root cellar can use just as much of the fall and early winter cold as it needs through air exchange, and the process is just as natural. The trick with using a root is to cool down to the ideal storage temperature for root vegetables, which is somewhere in the mid-30s, at the time you're bringing the root vegetables in here after harvest in the fall. Well, there isn't cool enough air in here, but there is cool enough air outdoors at night as the temperature goes down in the fall and early winter nights. So the trick is to get the cold air from outside into the cellar and keep it here. And I do that very simply. There are 2 pipes. This is the warm air exit pipe, and it's up near the ceiling, and warm air rises, and this goes into a little chimney outside the building. And the warm air from the ceiling then can exit out through here. This pipe, which is the cold air intake pipe, sits right at ground level outside and lets the cool air come down and fill the room. And this is happening automatically. Warm air rises, cool air falls. In the morning, I just put little covers over the outside ends of these so they don't move air anymore, and I keep the cool air in here. Now, this system is totally automatic, and if I remember to do it right, I use the free cold outside to bring in and store here. And by late fall, when I harvest the root vegetables from the garden, the cellar has automatically cooled down to storage temperature, and it works perfectly. Now, this is mid-July, and the temperature in here now is in the low 60s. Well, that's not bad since it's in the mid-80s out of doors, but it isn't a good storage temperature, except maybe for some of the new potatoes I just harvested. It's good to keep them for a while. But basically, that's no problem, because all the vegetables in the summer are fresh from the garden. The only time I need the root cellar to store them is when it's too cold out of doors for them to stay out of doors. And by then, I've used the natural cold out of doors to cool it down in here, and they come in here. Now, what could be simpler than that? One of the keys to garden self-sufficiency is not to have to buy fertilizers. And the best way to do that is to grow the fertilizers right in your garden as green manures. Green manures are plants that you grow in order to turn under and make the soil more fertile. And usually they're legumes. That is, plants like peas and beans that can take nitrogen from the air and store it on the roots, and then you have lots of nitrogen in the garden to grow good plants. Well, we've set up a smorgasbord of different green manures here, and we're going to see which ones are best suited for my soil. This is a poor sample of soil. We're trying to improve it. The first one I have here is hairy vetch. And even though it looks low, it's actually quite tall because the vines fall down This is an excellent green manure because it's the hardiest of any of the ones I grow. This will grow longer into the fall, winter over, and grow again in the spring, so it'll protect the soil for me. Now this beauty here are bell beans. Bell beans are closely related to fava beans, and they have really done a job. Obviously, they like the soil, they put on good growth, they've beaten all the weeds, smothered them in fact, and I would say, except for the fact that the seeds of this are more expensive than others, this is really a winner. This cute little fella here is bird's foot trefoil. It has one advantage. The stems are very thin and the leaves are very fine. And if I want something to turn in and decompose quickly, this will decompose much more quickly than obviously a heavy stem plant like those bell beans. That's an advantage of this, but I really haven't got much growth. I probably wouldn't try that again. Now these are lupins, sweet white lupins, and they're closely related to the lupins in the garden, only these are annuals. They've done a darn good job, not quite as big as the bell beans, but they have another advantage. They have a taproot that goes right on down and penetrates the subsoil. And so if one of my problems were a compacted subsoil, I'd probably think that was a pretty good choice. Okay, here we have a failure. This was Crotalaria, or at least I tried to plant Crotalaria here, and Crotalaria obviously didn't like my soil or my conditions. It needs good hot weather. In hot conditions, this can grow 12 foot tall in the summer. This has all come into weeds because the Crotalarias failed. I'm going to mow those down before they go to seed on me. Now these four are really quite similar, but they're all different. This is a new one for me, beer seam clover, originally from Egypt. And it's come in so thickly and nicely, I'm going to give this another look. I still don't know how plants will do grown after I turn it under, but thus far it's promising. This is Korean Lespedeza, another hot weather green manure, and probably one that's not suited for here. Too short, not enough growth. And these are two good old New England favorites, sweet clover and red clover. Both excellent, probably my two favorites, especially sweet clover. It's a biennial. I can leave it over and it'll come back next year if I can afford the space. They don't smother the weeds, though, as you can see, quite as well as the bell beans did. What are the considerations for you? Well, it depends on what does well where you live and what you want to do with the green manure to get the fertility into your soil. You might even run a little trial like this. It's certainly been fun. I have a passion for making things simpler and easier, and I got to wondering whether I could garden without buying any garden tools. Well, maybe I can't get all the way there, but if I set up my system right, I come pretty close. Now, I have a bed here where I've just pulled out some old overgrown broccoli plants. And if I'd let this go to weeds, I might have to get a fork and get rid of them, bury my mistakes. But I try to keep the garden weed-free, so basically all I have is a lumpy mess here. And I need to smooth it out so I can replant it, spread some compost to improve the fertility. So I went down to the basement and I said, okay, what's here that I could use? Well, what I found was this paint roller. And I thought, what if I went out there and just rolled this nice little thing back and forth? Isn't that neat? I've almost seen a machine behind a tractor that works like that. And look at the beautiful seed bed I get just using what was lying around the basement. Well now, if that works that well, maybe I can continue this. So I took an even older paint roller, took the roller part off, heated the blade up, and hammered it flat at about a 70-degree angle like this, and sharpened it with a file. And now I have a planting hoe and a weeding hoe. And so I can take the corner of this and make the furrow for where I'm going to plant my seeds. And later on, when the seeds are up, I have about as nice a weeding hoe as I'd ever want. I can even sneak it in under plants there. And this all came from things just lying around the basement. They do the job well, and they do it with tools that were already available. Now, another inspiration. I said, okay, this works, but how am I going to get in between those lettuces? Well, building odd inspiration, I took a piece of wire, hammered its end flat for about 4 inches, bent it around, and stuck it in an old wooden handle that normally has a file in there. And now I have a little homemade cultivator that fits neatly in between these plants. I call it my wire weeder. It's very efficient. It won't handle big weeds, But the secret of not needing a lot of extra tools in the garden is to keep ahead on the tasks, let only the vegetables you want grow, keep it cultivated so the others aren't there, and then when time comes to replant, the soil is ready to go.
The marvelous thing about self-sufficiency is that you really can grow so much of your own food yourself. We even got a little wheat harvest this year. We're going to grind this into flour to make bread.
You know, it's like a line in Boris Pasternak's Dr. Zhivago, where he says, what happiness to work from dawn to dusk for your family and for yourself, to build a roof over their heads, to till the soil to feed them, to create your own world.
So from our world to yours, goodbye and good gardening.
Next on TLC, doing something for your home can be easy, even fun. Check and see here on Homebodies. Then, add value to your home with some serious improvements. The Home Pro shows you how.